Greetings, young science minds. Today, in our study of waves, we are focusing on frequency. So here we go with page 8. Let's read through the text, and then we'll see how you do with all your answers. The text says this: frequency is a word scientists use when talking about waves. However, scientists are not the only people who use this word. Your dentist might ask, how frequently do you brush your teeth? The answer might be twice a day, daily, or even once a week. Hopefully that's not your answer, right? Frequency means how often something happens. If you mow your lawn once every week, the frequency of mowing your lawn is once per week. If you brush your teeth every morning and night, the frequency of you brushing your teeth is 2 times per day. How often? Third paragraph here. The frequency of a wave is the number of times a crest or trough passes through a given point in a certain time. Waves usually have a frequency measured in hertz. That is abbreviated Hz, and it means cycles per second. For example, the crest of a slow-moving wave might pass through a point once per second, and that would be 1 hertz. The crest of a fast-moving wave might pass through a point 30 times per second, and that would be 30 hertz. One of the main factors affecting frequency is wavelength. The longer the wavelength, the longer it takes for a wave to pass through a point. Radio waves have long wavelength, and therefore a low frequency. Conversely, which means on the other hand, the shorter the wavelength, the less time it takes for a wave to pass through a point. Gamma rays have a short wavelength and therefore a high frequency. Okay, so the frequency of a wave. How many times does a crest pass through a given point in a certain time? Frequency. Questions at the bottom. Give an everyday definition of frequency. Well, to an everyday person, not a scientist like you and me, we have to go back here to paragraph 2. Frequency means how often something happens. There's your everyday definition. How often? Now 1b says, give a scientific definition. Now we've got to go down to paragraph 3. First paragraph, here it is, here's your definition. The frequency of a wave is the number of times a crest or trough passes through a given point in a certain time. There's the scientific definition. Question 2. What is the relationship between wavelength and frequency? Okay, the relationship between the two. Well, let's take a look here. Last paragraph. One of the main factors affecting frequency is wavelength. The longer the wavelength, the longer it takes for a wave to pass through a point. So if something has a long wavelength, it has a low frequency. If something has a shorter wavelength, it has a higher frequency. That's the relationship between the two. 3a. Is the frequency of a wave with short wavelength usually high or low? Remember, if it has a short wavelength, a lot of crests or a lot of troughs can pass through a point in a certain amount of time. That means it would have a high frequency. 3b. What about the frequency of a wave with a long wavelength? Well, if it's got a long wavelength, it's going to take a longer amount of time to pass through a point, which would mean less of them can pass through a point in a certain amount of time. So long wavelength means low frequency. Number 4. 4a. A light flashes 3 times in a second. What is the wave's frequency in hertz? Well, hertz is how many cycles per second, so we would say 3 hertz, 3 times per second. And the last one here, our grand finale, 4b. If a whistle blows every hour, what is the wave's frequency expressed in whistles per day? Well, how many hours in a day? Uh-huh, 24. So that would be the frequency of that whistle, 24 times per day.